I held on to that idea of suicide as a safety net, as if anything gets too difficult, if things get too complicated and too difficult, then at least I can end my own life. That's something that I can do.
Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. Not through lectures or statistics, but by doing what I do best. Interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. Real voices, lived experiences, no bullshit. These conversations matter, and if you think so too, please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. You can reach me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. Right then, let's get started. Today, I'm speaking with Martin Fenerty. Martin is a 55-year-old gay man from Liverpool who has been living with HIV since 1993. He works as a counsellor and psychotherapist in the NHS, charitable sector, for LGBTQ+ and HIV services, and in private practice. Martin's journey began at the age of 23, a reality that profoundly shaped his early experiences and outlook. He has navigated the dramatic shifts in HIV treatment, from the era of harsh early antiretrovirals to the hope brought by combination therapy, and now lives well with the virus. Martin's story is one of confronting deep personal fears and societal stigma, witnessing the evolution of support for people with HIV, and ultimately channeling his experience into a career dedicated to supporting others facing similar challenges. His insights into the long-term impact of HIV, the lingering effects of past traumas, and the current needs of the community are incredibly valuable. And so with that in mind, Martin, a huge thank you for joining me here on HIV The Morning After.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here.
And it's great to have you here. I mean, that's quite an introduction. So you were diagnosed with HIV in 1993 when you were only 23 years old. Can you take us back to that moment? What were the circumstances of your diagnosis and what did it tell you about your future?
I'd been out as a gay man only for a couple of years at that point, and had quite a rough time. Me and my family had quite a difficult time dealing with my sexuality and me coming out. And I'd had a relatively sheltered life up to the point that I came out. So, I was maybe quite young and younger at heart and in mind than maybe some contemporaries. Along the way, I'd had some sort of serious symptoms in the summer of 1993.
What are these symptoms that you have?
I had a huge outbreak of facial herpes. So what began as a cold sore, which I'd never had before, really sort of manifested in quite an extreme way. All sorts of sites across my face and my neck. It was a period of, a very stressful period of my life. So there was that. I went to my GP, and there wasn't really anything that they could do, and they sent me away, and they didn't really question why I was having such significant symptoms.
And that must have been a lot of pressure on you to have a symptom that is so visible. I used to work at a facial disfigurement charity, and a lot of the work that they did at that charity was about helping people manage the stigma that they faced with any kind of scarring on their faces.
you're young, you're conscious of your appearance, and it was profoundly upsetting. Yeah, obviously I didn't really want to go out. I was embarrassed going out to the shops, and socialising just wasn't really going to happen because it looked pretty nasty. It was quite angry.
And so, can you take us to that day when you were testing? Where did you go? What were you thinking? What happened?
It was a time of particular change, though it wasn't really on my mind. There had been a sexual health service dedicated to seafarers in the city centre called the Seaman's Dispensary. And that was favoured often by gay men and for people involved in sex work, because it had a reputation for being more open-minded. That was relatively straightforward, getting the blood done and being treated well. The change was that was actually closing down whilst my sample was at the laboratory. So the service transferred to the local hospital, the Royal Liverpool Hospital.
Now, I'm guessing this is back at the time when you didn't get a pinprick and then waited 3 minutes and got your result. You had a 2-week wait.
It was a 2-week wait, yeah.
And what was that 2 weeks like for you, waiting?
I wasn't really thinking about the result in a lot of ways. I think I was pushing out of my mind and just being a young mind, getting on with my life. And maybe it was there to some degree, but you don't really want to think about what that result might be.
So 2 weeks go by and you've been putting it out of your mind. You then need to go back to a different venue to collect your results. What happens?
So this was quite convoluted, really, in a way, because my partner at the time was a nurse in that GUM clinic. So the clinic actually realised that my result had come through and I had that connection. So they were very concerned about my confidentiality and protecting me, and you not disclosing that information to him. So I I had a health advisor turn up at my door at about 5 o'clock at night one rainy November.
I'm guessing you weren't told on the doorstep. They came in, sat you down and told you. Yeah. What are you thinking and what did you think your future would be like?
It was too much for me to take in, really. I think I was in shock, and I think that was probably exacerbated by the context of where I was finding out and how I found out. One way or another, they had challenges around keeping that information secure, and so it was really just a whirlwind for me.
And at that time you had a partner?
Yes, yeah, who was there working in clinic at the time. So he knew I'd gone for an HIV test. In fact, he had gone for an HIV test at the same time, and I think if I remember rightly, he'd had his result that day.
And did you now have the same status, the two of you?
No, he tested negative.
So there's a lot of complexity suddenly thrown into your relationship.
Yeah.
How did you navigate that?
The complexity really was around my response to that diagnosis and his, and how we responded in that together, but separately as well. It had a big emotional impact, and I think when somebody in a couple receives a significant diagnosis, the partner has needs as well, and often can feel like they're left on the outside and their needs aren't considered necessarily as greatly as the person who's received the diagnosis.
Because the partner has effectively found out news that leads them to assume that their partner is going to die in not that long a time?
We were both involved in HIV volunteering at that point. So in some ways we were lucky that we had a lot of knowledge, and were able to sort of gather some support around ourselves.
So can you tell me, why were you working in the HIV field in your volunteer capacity? Why were you doing that at a time when many people probably wanted just to pretend it wasn't happening?
I'd left university about a year before, and I'd done a biochemistry degree, but I was absolutely rubbish. I had no scientific acumen whatsoever, and I did quite poorly in my degree. So I was faced with a crossroads, really thinking about, well, what do I do next? Because the expectation had been for me to pursue some career in science. And so I started from first principles, really volunteering in a variety of different contexts. So LGBT youth services, Citizens Advice Bureau, and HIV also felt a natural place to be as a gay man, and because friends were also involved in that.
So you have found out that you are HIV positive. It's 1993. You've had a conversation with your HIV negative partner. Now, can you give me an idea of what you had witnessed up to this point of HIV and AIDS in your life?
HIV was very stigmatized, and it was a phantom that influenced everything, or it was a hangover of everything. It was a dark cloud, and yet people didn't want to speak about it, and it was anathema to sort of be associated with people who were positive in some degree, even in the gay community.
Were you fearful of stigma either in your personal life or professional life that you might encounter?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I'd already experienced that as a young gay man, not just in my personal and family life, but in my academic career, in my personal career. I was conscious that people were homophobic, that being gay, even being gay then, was stigmatized and could have an impact on your career depending on the workplace. It was potluck, really, about whether you would be in a workplace that was accepting of you, that wouldn't see you as being something exotic or some dark perverted presence, or however you want to describe it. We'd had at least 10 years of quite hate-filled, salacious headlines in the media, related to homophobia and HIV stigma and fear, and talking in terms of dehumanizing people, and talking about people being interned and people being deserving to die and be ill, and things being seen as being sinful and degenerate, all sorts of very, very stigmatizing and disgusting language really around it.
And what would you say to people who are listening to this, who don't know much about our stories, who maybe aren't even queer people, who go, well, do you know what? It was a problem of their own making. They should have stopped having so much sex. They should have just settled down and got themselves one partner and do it properly.
Well, the thing that I quite often say to people in my work is that people get HIV in exactly the same contexts and environments, and for exactly the same reasons that people find themselves surprised that they're having a child, and yet one is respectable, or certainly more respectable these days, and one is seen as being dirty and disgusting. Sex in those contexts outside of marriage or outside of secure relationships doesn't mean that those sexual interactions aren't caring, aren't intimate, aren't filled with love, even if they're only one-off.
So it's 1993, and we're in the days, weeks, and months following your diagnosis. What's happening in your life? What are you feeling?
I'm very much in shock. I had extraordinary advice that I should filter water before using it for drinking. Water, that I should avoid runny eggs. Just sort of extraordinary advice. I was also advised that my life would be limited, that it was likely that I wouldn't survive beyond 5-10 years. So these smaller bits of advice, like filter water and be careful about unpasteurized milk or whatever, all served to really embed that idea that I'm at risk of dying.
So, Martin, you're thinking about dying
Yeah.
and the end of your life. How old are you?
23.
Do you think that's a good time to be thinking about the end of your life?
Absolutely not. It's a time of your life when, well, you're still embarking on early adulthood. You're still thinking about what your future might be, who you might be, actually thinking about who you might be as a person, and thinking about mortality or being faced with mortality is a really profound and distressing experience, and it certainly was for me.
And is death and dying all very theoretical, or is it actually happening around you?
It's happening around me. Now being more aware, having had my diagnosis of HIV, you become more aware of out in the community with people who maybe seem more unwell, look more unwell, and you make assumptions around that. But also you hear about people dying, and I was aware of people who were bereaved, and also some people who I knew also died. I held it at a distance, and I distanced myself. I had to sort of protect my own well-being, because I think, I sort of know really that I was traumatized by that, by the diagnosis and by that idea that I was going to die within 5 to 10 years.
So dead before you're 40.
Dead before I'm 35, in theory.
And yet, you somehow persevered. How did you do that? How did you start to pull the threads and tie them back together again?
I don't know whether I actually did in a sense. I mean, I threw myself into work and sort of trying to establish some sort of life for myself. I wanted relationships. I was lonely. I was scared. My relationship with my partner at the time ended about a year or two after.
Just to interrupt that, my immediate question into that, purely because I think most people listening to this would be curious to know, was your status the reason for that split?
The relationship came to a natural end. I don't think my trauma and my mental health necessarily helped with that. But we were both relatively young as well, and navigating all of that for anybody in a relationship would have a toll. But I think even without my HIV diagnosis, actually, I think the relationship would have come to a natural end.
But you are presented with a situation now that for the first time since your diagnosis, you're a single man.
Yeah. At this point, I have very little, in fact, no contact with my family. So I'm very much alone ship at this point. My outlook really was quite limited, other than I just need to put money on the table, have a home, and feed myself, and just subsisting.
What was the nicer side of Martin's life like? What is 1995 Liverpool like? Give us an idea of what the queer scene is like. What do you experience on the better days?
The queer scene's quite is quite vibrant. There are a number of different venues, and it's very different to today. They had a diversity of ages, people mixed in lots of different venues. I mean, if you're a young man, you would laugh and sneer at people who were older, as foolish young people want to do.
But some of them being over 30 even.
Some of them being over 30, God forbid.
Good grief.
There was some camaraderie, and I think Liverpool gay scene was particularly vibrant at that time. People visited from out of area specifically to come to Liverpool.
And did you feel that you could be open about your status? Because we hear many stories about how supportive our community is. Is that a fantasy, or did you actually feel that it was quite a supportive space where you could just be absolutely open and be yourself?
No, I didn't. I didn't think it was a safe environment to be open. So early on in my diagnosis, my confidentiality was broken by somebody who was involved in the HIV charity, another volunteer. So my HIV status became known to quite a number of people. On the gay scene, I couldn't necessarily always escape it. If I was on the gay scene, and just for a night out and hanging out, and people, being younger, people thought I was there and wanting to cop off or whatever, then occasionally I'd get approached by people and they would make it known that they knew about my status.
Hang on, you say that they would make it known?
Yeah.
Strangers would come up to you and go, I know you, you're HIV positive.
Yes. Yeah. Was it to make me feel uncomfortable? Was it to almost tell me that they had an eye on me, hold me hostage to that diagnosis? I did feel very stigmatized. And
stigmatized by our own community.
Yeah.
We're told to expect stigmatization from the heterosexual community, but you were actively and aggressively stigmatized by the community.
Yeah. It's quite threatening, actually, even if it's done in quite an innocuous way. For people to do that, it is quite threatening. It's quite scary. What does that mean? And it also gives you the implicit message that you are unwelcome.
We're in the mid-90s. What is your health like? Because we are before combination therapy still. How is your health?
I ended up with chronic fungal infections on the skin, so sort of quite significant ringworm, and thrush in my mouth. My energy levels got gradually worse and suffered fatigue. And I was getting more and more chest infections and stomach infections. And that was more debilitating than I realised at the time. I would vacuum my little living room in my flat and I'd have to lie down and have a sleep. But that decline in health was so insidious.
Did you let yourself think, okay, this is the beginning of the end?
I think I sort of accepted it as part of the territory, but I don't think I allowed myself to think consciously or fully consciously about just where that could lead me.
And do you think that helped or hindered you processing what you're going through as your health is declining?
I guess in some ways, actually, I think it did help. I think it was necessary. It was denial that I was going through, and denial is a word that people bandy around quite a lot these days as though it's a bad thing, but actually denial does have that psychological function of keeping you safe until you're in a place where you can process and accept things and deal with them more directly. It has an evolutionary function for us, just to keep us going step by step when we're in those situations.
You had written in your pre-interview notes that you had wondered whether you were waiting to die. What do you mean by that?
For all that I was having a good time, and I was building a social network and getting friends and having a lovely time, my life was sort of frozen in a way, or I was frozen from that point, with just in terms of how I guess thought about myself and thought about life. And underpinning everything was this assumption that I was going to die. So I didn't plan very far ahead. I didn't have any aspirations beyond that. But also I was I found myself really fearful of doing anything that was sort of too far in the future or too ambitious. People around me, my peers, were doing all sorts of things in their lives, and my life was relatively small, unremarkable. I'd lived over 10 years with the virus, and all of a sudden I was faced with the reality, well, actually, if I've lived 10 years with the virus, I could live 20 years with the virus. I could live 30, 40 years with the virus. And I think around me, people started to talk around people living longer lives with HIV and living into old age. And that was an extraordinary realization for me. But that idea that I was waiting to die also came from some internalized ideas I guess I had about myself, that maybe that I deserved to die, that I'd those messages around homophobia, the homophobic messages I'd been brought up with, and the messages I'd received, the messages that had been around sort of HIV and sexual stigma and all of that had affected me quite profoundly. And though I didn't necessarily intellectually believe any of those things, it shaped how I regarded myself. And I regarded myself as a bad person who was worthless.
It's curious, isn't it, that we can go on these marches and wave these flags and be thought leaders for other people, and yet we are still just as vulnerable to these thoughts as anyone else.
Yeah. And I don't think people around me would have imagined that those sorts of thoughts were there in my head, or those beliefs about myself were there in my heart and in my soul. But they were.
And did you feel ever that you wanted to take control of the ending of your life rather than waiting for it to happen?
I very much suffered with my mental health, and I think I'd had quite strong thoughts of suicide, and there'd never been any immediate danger of me acting on those thoughts, but I held on to that idea of suicide as a safety net, as if anything gets too difficult, if things get too complicated and too difficult, then at least I can end my own life. That's something that I can do. I started combination therapy in 1997. And combination therapy really was transformative. Within 6 months, my viral loads, so the amount of virus that they were able to test for in my blood, was what they call undetectable. So I wasn't virus free, but it was at such a level that they weren't able to detect it. That led to a sort of transformation in my health. So it was then that I actually realised the full extent of how ill I'd been up till then. My energy levels really rebounded. My body physically rebounded. So I started I started to become ill with a variety of different things. And it was because my immune system had been rebooted. And I'd lost immunity to some things because my immune system had been under attack. So it was like I was meeting some of these bugs and some of these things for the first time, like I was a child. And so I was responding to them physically in the same way.
So we're coming into a space now where you've had HIV for a long time. It's pretty clear you're not going to die.
Yeah.
Your combination therapy is working.
Mm-hmm.
We've come to now, it's 2025. How's your life? How are you?
My life is.
I've just realised I sounded like Holly Willoughby. And how are you?
My life is really very good. That realization that I was waiting to die was a realization that I had to live and that I had to take control of, and that I wanted to take control of my life and to make choices, to live and to learn how to live. And I think that's something that I have done over the last 20 years. I'm as healthy as I can be for a 55-year-old man. I have health problems, but nothing that no other 55-year-old man could not expect to have. I'm physically very nimble. I run, I go to the gym, and I work full time, in very sort of demanding but fulfilling career, and I'm in a relationship. I'm married. I'm married to somebody who is HIV negative. We have a nice little home here in Liverpool, and life has worked out really well for me.
And what do you feel some of the unique needs are of HIV positive people as they age?
I think what hasn't changed is the ignorance and the stigma and the prospect of discrimination. For anybody as they get older, there's a certain creeping vulnerability around health and needing to be cared for that naturally emerges. And I think with living with HIV, we can't necessarily take for granted that those people who are meant to be caring for us or meant to be supporting us are going to do that in good faith and not going to be clouded by our diagnosis and whether they think we deserve to be treated well or treated compassionately, is a very real fear. I think the reality is there's probably very mixed experiences. I think the vast majority, certainly of health professionals, will want to behave ethically and professionally. But there are instances, I hear from people who have instances who have experienced stigma and discrimination in healthcare, and they sense it and they see it. Through maybe reluctance to progress people through health pathways, or just people's attitudes and them seeing different attitudes in practice.
Absolutely. I remember hearing a story I live in Brixton,
Mm.
so Lambeth is my patch, and you'd think that with Brixton, Clapham, Kennington, very very high queer population here, you'd think that the sexual health clinics would be outstanding. But I remember being told a story from not that long ago of a gay man who went in for his checkup and usual conversation with the doctor who was there, middle-aged female doctor, and she said, usual questions, what kind of sexual practices have you been up to? And one of them had been oral sex, and she said to him, did you use a condom? And he went, no. And apparently she clutched her chest and said, when will you people learn?
That's incredible. That's incredible to hear. And that's actually that's really quite upsetting, because I've worked in sexual health services of one kind or another for about 20 years here in Liverpool, and I, as a HIV specialist counsellor, I work from within a sexual health service, and I'm quite proud to do that. I think we've got an excellent team, and people get really excellent care here. But that horrifies me that anybody would experience that within a sexual health service, and I think a lot of sexual health professionals would feel the same.
In the context of the conversation that I was told it, so I think this was about 7 years ago, was when Lambeth merged GUM clinics with family planning. And so you had family planning experts with people coming in saying, oh, well, I sucked off 5 guys and got fisted on Sunday.
Yeah.
And they're like, ah!
Very different kettle of fish for them to deal with than maybe somebody coming in for emergency contraception or whatever. It's those other parts of the health service that often people will meet great challenges when they are perhaps going to their GP or trying to access dental services, or have other health problems which aren't HIV related, aren't within the expertise of the HIV clinic, and necessitate them being referred to other specialities. That's where it becomes more of a lottery. The stakes in that lottery become highest is when people are really ill, perhaps in occupying a hospital bed or having carers coming into their home. You're most vulnerable, but those stakes are really, really high. You really rely on those people treating you with kindness and treating you to the most effective and best way possible. And we can't necessarily guarantee that we'll meet people with those values.
Martin, here in London, there is an amazing garden in the grounds of what had been the London Lighthouse, a place where many people died. And this garden was an incredible place of relaxation and remembrance, because many, many people's ashes are scattered there. And in this part of the show, which is in the final portion, I ask you and people listening to, in their minds, go to that place of remembrance. And ask you if you could please tell us about one person who you would like to share with us today.
So you asked me to think about this when we were preparing for the podcast, and the person who comes to mind was a friend of mine, Mark Morrell Williams, who was actually the first person I met who was HIV positive. He was an older gay man, or older than me, and I actually met him in his hospital bed, so I was introduced to him by other friends who were visiting him, and I got sort of carried along into the visit, which is a really strange way to meet somebody when they're ill and in their bed, their hospital bed. But he He lived for a few years longer after that with varying levels of health, but initially he was relatively healthy and out and about, and he was a wonderful character. Had lived all over the country, and for a time he ran Body Positive in Chester and North Wales, and Body Positive was well, there were lots of body positives around the country, but they were HIV support organisations run by positive people for positive people. He worked and lived quite openly as positive in the 90s, and very much advocated for the rights of positive people. I'd looked up to him as a peer, as a man living with HIV, as he's somebody I've held precious ever since, and I think he had a profound influence in my resolution, or some resolution of my trauma. He was an example or a role model for me of how to live well with HIV. I supported him in the last 18 months of his life when he was in and out of hospice. Unfortunately, he died in 1997, aged 39, so he died just before I started combination therapy, and he'd seemed to be too ill at that point to start combination therapy. I'd like to remember Mark. I still remember him with lots and lots of love. And I know some other friends of mine will hold him very, very dearly to this day as well.
The nature of this podcast has been to ask of you a number of important questions. And I think I've certainly saved till the end, or certainly the penultimate question is probably one of the most important ones that we're going to ask in the whole hour plus that we've been talking. And that is, in your notes, you said that you've got a cat called Ava.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know if it's named after Ava Peron.
So, you're curious whether I have any nascent fascist sympathy?
Yeah, hidden in your pet names. You've got your chihuahua called Adolf.
She's not knowingly named after Eva Peron. So me and my husband, we inherited her a couple of years ago. She was a friend's cat, and sadly he passed away, and we were looking after her when he died, and we inherited her. So we don't know the provenance of her name, but sometimes I do refer to her as Ava Peron, the spiritual leader of the country. I have to confess.
And cats kind of have that attitude, don't they?
They do. She is very much the centre of our home. She will deign to be affectionate to us, but will just take herself off to do her own thing, as cats want to do.
Martin, you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you ever so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Now, to finally end the show with images of your fascist cat spinning around in my head, what would your postcard to the world be?
I think because my life and my career has been shaped and touched by sort of stigma and discrimination, I'd like to sort of say that there is life to be lived after HIV diagnosis. Even to this day, people will receive their diagnosis and think that that's the end of their life, and it very much isn't. Your life hasn't ended. Your life can be lived to the fullest extent that you want, and everything remains available to you. And to the wider world, I think that positive people are everywhere, and whatever you believe, we are, we can't, we won't, we don't want to harm you. And actually we are you. We've lived our lives just like you. And it's just that the outcome has been different.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of HIV The Morning After. My sincerest thanks to you, Martin Fenerty, for your fantastic interview, for your honesty and courage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, suggest a guest, or share your own thoughts, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.